Hi everyone, it's Colleen here from Radio Omnicore. I'm so excited about this episode. We're going to be talking with Dr. Ruth Verhey from the Friendship Bench. Ruth is a clinical psychologist and she introduces us to this incredible concept. If you haven't heard of the concept of the Friendship Bench, Ibn Shapiro describes it best in a 2019 Time magazine article about the organization. Quote, "The Friendship Bench trains Zimbabwean grandmothers in problem-solving therapy, which take place on wooden benches known as friendship benches." And I came across this article describing Dr. Chiabanda, who's the founder of this concept, and I was absolutely enthralled. I think this idea is simply genius, and I'm sure you're going to be inspired too. So let's jump straight into the conversation. Great. So welcome, Ruth. It's so wonderful to have you in studio today. Nice to see Dr. Rudnick in the corner.
Hi.
And we're really thrilled to chat to you today about this incredible concept called the Friendship Bench. And why don't you just kick off with telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I mean, it's just such an honor to have people interested in our programs. So we're always excited. And so my name is Ruth Verhey, and I'm a clinical psychologist. And I'm originally from Germany, and I've been living in Zimbabwe for 17 years now. So I guess I register as Zimbabwean by now. And like my passion is mental health. Definitely. So I am working as a psychotherapist and I've got a trauma specialty. So I'm very much involved in that world as well. And when it comes to the program, the Friendship Bench, it is a mental health program for communities. So we really want to bring a very basic, very easily accessible mental health component to primary healthcare, basically. And as we all know, mental health has gone through a bit of a shift in the past couple of years. Like finally, people are waking up and understanding that this is an extremely important part of health that we've all been ignoring, I almost want to say, except the ones that have something to do with it. And we're very few, either on the patient or on the therapist point of view or side. And I think it's super important to go in there and allow people to understand there is something that people can do for their own mental health. There's help out there. And maybe I'll stop here and ask me more questions.
Wonderful. I'm just fascinated. Obviously, been reading a lot about, well, not obviously, but we've spoken. Been a great fan. I'm not sure how long your concept's been going, but I came across the article in the Time magazine about the founder and just how it came to being and where you joined and what your role is in the whole concept.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Thank you for that question. Yeah. So currently, my newest role is I'm the International Friendship Bench lead. So we are really trying to roll it out to other areas. But going back to the history of it, it started in, I don't want to lie, but 2006, I would say right now, roughly, when my colleague Dixon Chibandu started it. And that was part of his Masters of Public Health. And he kind of did his field work and found high level of prevalence of those common mental disorders that we call, in our setting here in Zimbabwe, kufungisisa, which stands for thinking too much, which I think is a great way of describing what people go through, right? Like we would call it ruminating. We all know what that does to us at night, And so it's not quite hitting the clinical criteria for depression in the DSM kind of version, but it is very understandable and very graspable for most people. And the thing is, with the stigma around mental health and the lack of understanding for mental health, so someone who has kufungisisa, who is thinking too much, will most likely present with a somatization and present with headaches. And if we then go to primary healthcare clinic and say, oh, my head, and we're dealing with a healthcare provider who also doesn't know anything about mental health, they will go home with a painkiller. And that means we will not have treated the cause. We will have treated some kind of symptom. Yes, I get that. But we won't have gotten into the what is really happening here. And anybody who's into mental health on any level, we don't just want to treat symptoms or the actual presentations. We also want to work preventatively. And often it goes back to people lacking coping mechanisms. And I think Colleen, I can talk forever about this because I find it so exciting. I think a lot of us have never learned to successfully emotionally regulate, and we should have learned that as children, and somehow we haven't. And then people go into all sorts of maladaptive strategies, how we call that, which might be drinking or shopping or I don't know, anything you can think of that takes us away from a feeling, for instance, that we feel is bothering us or feels out of control. Eating is a good one, or recreational drugs, smoking, you name it, over exercising. And I think if people were taught, and hopefully we will work on this more and more now, to regulate, and we call it often sit with feelings, there will be less of these maladaptive strategies, outright pathological strategies, actually. And in our setting, the friendship bench really came in because we found, and we have consecutively found in our research, about a third, if not more, people of those who come to primary healthcare clinics actually suffer from these kind of common mental disorders. And that's a high number. And we know that people who suffer from common mental disorders will have a spillover, or we can call it comorbidities, when they, for instance, have any kind of chronic disease going for themselves. If it's a non-communicable chronic disease like diabetes or hypertension, which are extremely common with people who suffer from common mental disorders as well. Or if it's a communicable disease, and we're looking in our region here, we're looking at living with HIV or whatever it is, common mental disorders will have a negative effect on the people's ability to self-care. So that might be as basic as medication adherence. It might be as complex as not being able to look after your children properly. So there's evidence that, for instance, children, like young children, will thrive less when the primary caretaker, well, often the mother, is suffering from depression. And that's why it's so important to screen for this, because there is help. And at the same time, a lot of people don't think there's help because of the complex explanation models that people have about why people have what they have, kind of thing, if that makes sense, right? And if we just remind ourselves, what is it really when we talk common mental disorders? So what we commonly say, depression and anxiety, those are these symptoms of not having any interest, not having any drive anymore, being very sad, kind of eating, like overeating or undereating, oversleeping, undersleeping, being sad, obviously suicidal ideation, just in general could be more of a conflict behavior, so being more irritable. It could be basically anything, but these people are literally not able to function at their best. They're kind of out of whack. And in a lot of societies, we blame the person for this, when really there is also kind of a reaction to the environment. And most people who suffer from depression or anxiety already feel bad that they are not on top of their game. So they really do not need someone to blame them for not being on top of it, for not having the energy they maybe once had, for not wanting to look after themselves or others anymore. And that's where we have to come in, and we have to create an understanding, and we have to create a sense of hope again, and a sense of, and this is where the friendship bench tries to really come in, there's a sense of there's someone who listens to me without judgment. I can just talk, and I won't be laughed at, I won't be blamed, I won't be shamed. Someone is just going to help me understand and go through that normalization process with me, that this is like, I'm a little bit careful to call it an illness or a disorder, because it is so common. I mean, if you look at what the WHO puts out, they really literally say lifetime prevalence is 1 out of 4. So that could be, we're 3 people here, I don't know how many people listen to your podcast, but just count 1, 2, 3, 4, bum, you've got one, and then go again, you've got someone else. And I'm like, over time, as I said, I work as a psychotherapist, and over time, I'm like, I've been there. I've done it. I've had my therapy, needed my therapy. I'm definitely one of the 1 out of 4. And we know that people who once had it are more at risk of getting it again. So that makes it even more important to offer easily accessible and acceptable programs where people don't have to get fully sick.
So Ruth, can I maybe just come in there? I think these in terms of the basic concept of what you're doing, I mean, we know that training of psychotherapists is expensive, epistemologies are hard to learn, and all those kind of things. And I think your concept is we get lay people in the community to sit with people who may have trouble, and they have some kind of conversation or discussion, and out of that emerges improvement, right? Is that the basic concept?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I was involved in a similar project, and I'm interested in you in how fussy are you about the nature of the conversations that people are having? How much training are you putting in to make sure that those conversations are productive in some way, and not damaging, and that people are not getting bad advice and those kind of things? I mean, I'm interested in that.
Yeah, wonderful question, Hilton. Wonderful question, and so important. So we've been learning over time, and we have to put it into the context that's possible. So we started out with a 2-week training, for instance, covering mental health literacy, basic counseling skills like active listening, all of that jazz, and then go into the actual problem-solving therapy that is what is basically the core of Friendship Bench. So we say we offer problem-solving therapy to people, fully knowing that someone who deals with a lot of depression and anxiety has most likely cognitive difficulties and can't so easily solve problems anymore. That means whatever is difficult in your life or seems difficult in your life seems even more difficult in your life. So that's why a therapeutic context in this kind can really help with someone who guides you. So like I said before, we have reduced our training days a little bit. We're still experimenting with what needs to be done, how does it need to be done, and just going back to what you said earlier. So we do indeed work with community health workers mostly, and volunteers now in Zimbabwe as well. And these community health workers are employed as health promoters. Some of them have a little bit of sort of counseling training before, all sorts of other trainings. And they come to the training, and they often, maybe I'll swing around to that one. Often we get labeled as we work with the grandmothers, and people always ask, why grandmothers? Why elderly women? Are there men as well? Yes, we also have some men, and the elderly women were almost by default. That just happened because these health promoters, that's what their real work title really is. These community health workers who work as health promoters were employed in the late 1980s, and they grew old in their jobs, right? So this is how they become, or they became to be called grandmothers, really. So we didn't choose them as in like, let's find elderly women to do this, And so again, going back into the nature of elderly people being seen as important and to be respected parts of society, right? So I'm sure it's similar in South Africa. In the context in Zimbabwe, one goes to the auntie or to the uncle to get advice. So from that point of view, their wisdom is sought out, or their life experience. And now, interestingly enough, when we think of problem-solving therapy, the principles are not to give advice to the client. Right? It is all about empowering a client to learn the skill of detecting a problem and sort of circumscribe it and make it doable, solvable, and only work with that. And then go through a series of steps, basically. So find a goal and really determine that goal, and then go through a brainstorming process, which can be quite messy and quite scary for a lot of people, because it feels like, but why can't you just tell me what I should do? Right. And that's the art really here, is to empower anybody who works on the Friendship Bench as a counselor, to stop them from feeling they should or want to or whatever, would have to give advice, which it does happen. Going back to this, it does happen. We try to do quality checks, we do recordings, we listen in. Of course, it does happen from time to time, and it's not always bad. But as long as the structure of, no, client, you say what we're working on, and client, you decide where you want to go and when and in what situation you would say this problem is solved.
Does it go beyond the kind of Rogerian reflective listening to a more solution-focused kind of model?
Yes. And I love how you speak about the solution, because I also want to walk away from problem solving. I don't
Mm.
want to hear the word problem anymore. So I much rather want to go into this, okay, what solution are you looking for today, right?
Mm.
And it does. And at the same time, as we know in our setting, Zimbabwe being a low income country with a lot of socioeconomic problems that were even heightened through COVID, people come with problems for which is hard to find solutions around finances, chronic poverty, gender-based violence, a lot of those things that are really hard to solve. And I think the approach here is, let's look for something out of that big problem that is actually workable. And for me, that's the art. I know I can sometimes listen to recordings and I'm like, or read the transcripts rather, and I'm like, oh wow, you guys started out on to find a solution for something that is not even in your power, right? It's not in your control. So especially when we think of money or we think of gender-based violence, that's hard, and that's even hard for seasoned therapists to not fall in that trap of saying, yay, let's work with that. Yeah, your husband should change. Like, hello, husband's not in the room, we can't work on that. So yeah, and then it's hard for our community health workers, for our friendship bench counselors, sometimes to really work with these kind of issues, because they also live in the same environment. So when I say it's hard for them, I think there's also an advantage, because they really know what's going on. So the beauty of the system of community health workers that are attached to primary healthcare clinics are that they know their communities. So during the COVID restrictions, many of our clinics had to either close down or restrict their services massively. And that affected Friendship Bench immediately, right? Because Friendship Bench wasn't seen as an absolute necessary service. So what we did then to rethink this was to discuss with the Friendship Bench counselors how they could still offer their services, but away from the clinic. So basically, they do community outreach work anyways. So we were like, okay, can you then carry sort of a mental friendship bench with you as a symbol and do the counseling wherever you are, at a client's house or in front of a client's house or at the borehole or wherever. And we learned over time, and like I mentioned before, we do a lot of research around this. We learned over time that the community approach always happened in a way, but we were very focused on what is happening at the clinic in this setting. And we kind of really learned with COVID, it's actually happening much more in the community than we thought, which is, again, it has its pros and its cons, right? What does it mean in the community? Is there the same rigor around the approach, for instance, or is it not maybe potentially much more disturbed? Because if we sit in front of someone's house, how many people are walking in and out of the house during our conversation, for instance, or want something from the client who happens to live at that house, So there's a lot of flexibility required to still work the friendship bench process as such. And yeah, we're trying. So far, we get a lot of good responses. Yeah.
So, can you just take me through, if I was going to be coming to visit a friendship bench, how does it work? How do the people know where to go? What would I do? What would I expect?
Wonderful. Okay. So in the classic way, before COVID, you would have been a registered client at the primary healthcare clinic, and you might have sat there, with your baby in the waiting area, and the nurse and the community health worker would have maybe hold a health talk and also mentioned, hey, we're offering the friendship bench here. Do you sometimes feel down? Do you want to chat with someone? That could have been one way. Or maybe you have your baby wait and the nurse says, not so happy with how you feel. Go and see one of the grandmothers outside, right? So that was pre-COVID. But that also meant, if we look at the population who comes to the clinic, 80% women. So we had a very strong gender bias in our clientele, basically. And now after COVID, or during COVID, I should say, so first of all, we're trying to do a lot of kind of mental health advocacy at the moment and friendship bench advocacy. So radio and like being like using social media so that people know more about it. But also the community health worker in your community, for instance, is walking around her, doing her outreach, and might come across you and just say, hey, have you heard about the friendship bench? Have you heard about what mental health is and what poor mental health is, maybe where you could benefit from talking to someone? Do you want to talk to someone? So we have some community health workers who are literally giving this mobilization talk, how we call it. So they do the mental health awareness campaign right there with you. You might be a single person, or you might be sitting at that public borehole waiting for your turn to pump water, and you get this health talk. And then people might say, oh, yeah, I want to talk to you. And often they can talk right there and then. And what the community health worker does is they would first use a questionnaire with 14 questions that we've been using for many years. It was established in the late 90s in Zimbabwe. It's called the Shona Symptom Questionnaire, and basically covers those main symptoms. And she would go through this questionnaire to just establish where are you, in terms of your mental health. And then she would explain. So we call that a psychoeducation process, right? Explain to the person, oh, well, you scored that much, and look, you actually said you can't sleep, and you click this and you tick that. And that basically explaining to people this is normal when people have depression/anxiety, so that people get this understanding of, oh, I'm not crazy, right? Again, we live, I could imagine similar in South Africa. People have a lot of these, I don't even know how to say that, but I mean outright wrong ideas about why people have mental health issues, from being bewitched or any of those things. Again, it goes back to something bad and unfixable, or not fixable by themselves as such. So to basically help misspell these myths around mental health. And then the community health worker would basically engage in, hey, what do you want to talk about? And then guide the conversation through, okay, what is it that you want to work on today? Okay, describe that a bit. What is your goal with this particular thing? So what is the solution that you want to see? And then go through those steps of finding ways to get to that solution. Yeah,
it sounds a lot more like coaching, really, than therapy.
Yeah, I guess that's a good one. Yeah, that's a good word. But we never use the word coaching in our context. But we sometimes talk about talk therapy. I mean, I must admit, yes, do. I use the word therapy. I do sometimes, but not so much. For me, it is more like connection, talking, helping a person. So I suppose coaching would be a good word. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Ruth, the roots of psychotherapy are very individualistic. I mean, we know the kind of history, and I would imagine you working in a much more collective worldview in some kind of way. I mean, how do you marry those things, or is it not an issue at all in the way that you go about the work?
That's a great question. Yeah, me being from the West, I often also think about that.
Because it's often about empowering the individual to take on a thing, whereas we might find with traditional healers, it's about making social connections, and a group solves a problem, not an individual. And, all those kind of, where those two worlds collide. Is that a conversation that comes up at all in your thinking, or is it not really?
I wouldn't say so much that it's such a complicated conversation as such. So I felt, having worked in several continents, actually, I felt it does not matter where someone comes from. The symptoms that we display are very, very similar. It doesn't matter where I live, I can feel lonely. And I think that's something we all deal with right now, right? Or have been dealing with in the past year, or have learned to deal with, or not. So if I look at this aspect of collectivity, so there's an interesting paper out from a researcher from KCL in London, And she basically did a qualitative meta-analysis, or whatever you want to call it, and looked at what do people describe as reasons for depression. And what comes up in my like simple little words is, it is man-made stuff or woman-made stuff, right? So the collective also causes a lot of these problems, you know? So the solutions must be lying in this way of how people connect with each other, you know? And that can be misunderstood authorities or hierarchies. It can be a lack of care. It can be a lack of tolerance. It can be a lack of just communication skills, or it's a lot of all of those things. And often we come down to people not feeling, and again, this is my my European trained mind, of course, of being seen as important and as valuable, and feeling appreciated. And I think that it doesn't matter, again, where we live, it's important for everybody. And like, ask me about, if I can say quickly, so I did a study with our community health workers because I was interested in whether the complication of living in the same situation as their clients, having experienced the same problems as their clients, whether they would not be much more at risk of having secondary traumatization, for instance, right? Like hearing this, and after all, not having all the skills that a trained psychotherapist has on hand, or actually having no other versions than I can sit here and listen to you. And what came out of that study was that they are remarkably resilient. And the one thing that we've thought can explain this is, they're being accepted in the society as people to go to, then them understanding they're actually helping people by just sitting there listening, asking questions, you know, like this whole, like, we help someone helps us. And of course there are employed by the city health authorities. That means they have an income. It's a meager income, but it is an income. And sometimes they're even the main breadwinners of their families, despite being elderly. So, yeah.
Why are you not in South Africa yet? Because that would be it just feels like a no-brainer. You said it's been difficult to make inroads. What does it take to get the Friendship Bench going in a country?
Yeah, great question. So it's very interesting because we've talked to a few organizations from South Africa already, and somehow we just haven't quite struck the deal yet. So partially it is that I guess we do have expectations on who we would work with, and we are interested in working with an organization that actually has sort of the possibility to make that impact and sort of is aligned with our mission, and which I think probably is not the worst problem. It's something we can find. And then we have to find some kind of funding, you know, so people will, like, who is working, who are the delivering agents, basically, in what relationship are they with the organization, you know, are they, like, we're working with this as well. Like, is it possible to work with volunteers, for instance? You know, is that something that's going to be feasible for a longer period? So our experience from Zimbabwe, for instance, is we worked in a community with volunteers, and we had some younger people who were super interested and super smart, and yet they will move when there's an opportunity for them somewhere else, which is completely understandable, right? Like, from our perspective, it's like, you're going away again. We need you to stay, but there's no job, no nothing that can make them stay, so they will move. So as much as I would love to work with volunteers all over the place, I think especially in our setting here in the region, it's hard to work with volunteers. So is there an organization that actually supports delivering agents, so it becomes a job for them, or at least some kind of income? Yeah, but you're right. It's a no-brainer. We are working on it.
Ruth, I mean, I heard you use the word bewitched earlier, and it triggered something that we had come across over here. And, you know, I wondered how your world of the Friendship Bench coexists with the world of traditional healing, and like what you may see, you know, what I mean, I'm not sure, like where does it become even like things like psychosis, for example, that, you know, someone's hearing voices or those kind of things, which in a Western setting would have a meaning, but in a different worldview could be healthy.
Mm-hmm.
How do you navigate that complexity? And is it an issue?
Yeah, no, again, super important question. So I'll go back to, as you might have read, we did a clinical trial to prove the concept, and we say to everybody, Friendship Bench is aiming to help people who suffer from mild to moderate common mental disorders. So when we talk psychosis, that is out of that region, right? So yes, we delivering agents get taught about symptoms of psychosis and what that means, and how to recognize this, just as much as epilepsy, which is really common and misunderstood often. And at the same time, though, they would be empowered to either refer, or what we rather want to do is empower them to work with caretakers. So that the Friendship Bench then becomes perfect for the caretaker of someone who has a more severe psychiatric disorder. And the dream, and we're still sort of working towards that, is as well, how shall I say, psychiatric care in Zimbabwe is still quite institutionalized. And it would be lovely at some stage to see that open up, but that means there must be a community approach that is solid, right? So, we do see that Friendship Bench can play a role there in order to advocate and help manage, but mostly support those who care for someone. When it comes to the spiritual healers or traditional healers, we haven't worked as closely with them yet. We've been in touch, and we had like theory of change workshops. We had some participants who were talking, and we all felt what's important is that people know when to refer, for instance, right? When to and how to recognize, okay, this is beyond my scope of practice here as a traditional healer, for instance. And that was seen as very positive. I mean, and in fact, that came from them, where they're like, we totally want to do that, and we want to know, or we kind of know what are those signs and symptoms where we say, you know what, this is better. You get checked out somewhere else, yeah. Yeah, but without being too critical, we need a better system in Zim for psychiatric care still.
Well, I imagine that with the current situation, with COVID and all the impact that that's had on mental health, the word that's been thrown around now is languishing. I don't know if you've been reading. Yeah. And recently with your post of the hashtag, the me you can't see, which was so beautifully put. What have you seen as with the kind of clients coming? Have you noticed that impact with COVID to the Friendship Bench?
Actually, not so much. To tell you the truth, not so much. I think despite heavy lockdowns in Zimbabwe, and I'm pretty sure if we go into townships in your country, it's similar. Life just had to carry on. I mean, nobody could stay at home for weeks and stack their pantry with food for weeks or something, so people literally had to carry on. And I think people got worse in terms of jobs were lost, and just in general, kids not going to school. I think we've literally only started opening schools, public schools, couple of weeks ago. That means there's a huge group of children who has not gone to school for a whole year. I mean, and that in itself, that makes me so sad. But then again, during lockdown, I also saw children playing happily outside, compared to in other places of the world where children were locked into apartments and could not be playing outside. What a bless to be here then and play soccer somewhere, or run around. COVID itself, or the COVID, how shall I say that, consequences that we might discuss or read about in the newspapers have not come up as topics as such. But then the poverty would have come up, or the gender-based violence, or I don't know how to pay my rent. What do I do? That a lot.
Ruth, in terms of closing the loop on understanding the successes that you've had, I mean, is there any measurement or anything that you kind of do to say, we had these 50 conversations and, 90% of the people showed an improvement or something. I mean, is that part of it, or not really? Is it just, the fact that they're having conversations is enough?
No, this is cool that you asked that. So, like we said, I think one of the big success was this clinical trial that we conducted in 2015, and because that was so successful, and we could show after a follow-up period that, what was it? I think 80% of the participants had a reduced suicidal ideation, and there was like a reduction in sort of that disability scale of the WHO, and just in general symptomatology, that made basically our donors excited in supporting us and doing a scale-up exercise. And since then, we are trying to, and again, it's a question of money as well, right? Like finding funding to do further research, and we are. Well, this year actually we conclude a couple of research projects, and hopefully have publications out at some stage soon, where we try to look at more details as in how can it be combined with the non-communicable disease care in the community. For instance, as we know, like diabetes and hypertension are both these killer diseases that nobody recognizes, because you can almost have no symptoms with hypertension and still be like very close to having a stroke or something, and or with diabetes you have symptoms but you don't recognize them as a symptom. So we're wondering of can we get that group of people who have the three, depression, diabetes, and hypertension, or any combination of those, and help them recognize what's going on and help them to be managed by the same community health workers. And another study we concluded was how can we help young people, because young people don't necessarily come to the clinics, because our clinics, and I could just imagine it's similar in South Africa, are still heavily stigmatized as if you are seen at the clinic, you're either pregnant or you're living with HIV, right? So you better don't want to be seen at the clinic. And we've seen this as well in people then traveling for long distances to go to some other clinic and basically just pretending they live there, to not be seen at their own community clinic, and then think of the very, very very possible situation that you don't have transport money, and you cannot go back to pick up your medication, and you're defaulting on your HIV medication, which is a disaster in our setting. And so we thought, what do we need to do to pick up the young people? So we designed something called the Youth Friendship Bench, where we work with younger counselors. So these are university students who are in attachment with us, who get the full training, and luckily they stay for a whole year, and they are fantastic, especially now in the whole kind of bringing it to an online place, working with social media much more, and we are reaching people there, and that communication or the conversation around mental health is pushed forward by them massively. And so research is always there, and we are basically trying to do, how do I say that even? So we're building Friendship Bench as an organization at the moment. So outside of just being a research group or something, it's like, and that takes finding donor money, that takes building that whole system that an organization needs to function and be recognized. And in that case, so if you think of the delivering agents, as I said, being attached to city health authorities, meaning they are basically under the big umbrella of the Ministry of Health. So we're working with that existing system as a capacity building organization, basically, right? So it's an interesting context, and luckily the Ministry of Health in Zimbabwe is very excited about the mental health component, and we have a memorandum of understanding with them, which means we have the mandate to really roll out nationwide, and we're kind of step by step getting there. So yes, research is a big part, and we want to keep proving that we're doing something that works.
Ruth, what is your favorite? I mean, you're so passionate about this. You can just, I think anyone listening who wants to donate would sign up immediately. What is the favorite feature for you, perhaps, of this approach?
Yeah, good. So I haven't spoken about a favorite feature of mine, which is the group support part. So the friendship bench is not just an individual sit on the bench with someone or sit anywhere with someone or talk on the phone with someone, basically. It is, we have a voluntary support group that was run in those clinics pre-COVID, and we're kind of just getting back to it slowly, where we focused a lot on income generating activities at the beginning, because we know that this whole extreme systematic poverty and chronic poverty here is affecting people a lot. And I think like another part where we're just experimenting with is actually a gardening project. So using the group like that and helping people to do small horticultural projects together, and almost like create this, let's work together and share. So I do like that a lot, because I do believe that probably breaks stigma really well if we can be in a group together where we know we've all been people who've sat on the bench, and we are still normal people, and we want to help our community and ourselves. And I think I really enjoy that part. I find that's a great strength of it. Maybe I'll stop there.
Ruth, have you ever sat on the bench and been a recipient of the service and kind of, felt what it's like to talk through something that might be worrying you with someone and seeing?
That's a really cool question. So I can tell you, I've done a lot of the trainings, and then I was like a client in a training context. But actually, you're right. I have not sat on a bench in a primary healthcare clinic. I should probably do that. You're right.
I mean, I
have
just
a lot
think
of the group meetings, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it would be interesting for someone like me just to go and have a chat with someone where there's no strings attached, and I may never see them again, and we can just have a yak. We intersect for half an hour in our lives and move on.
Yeah.
And like there's something really appealing about that. It doesn't cost anyone anything.
Exactly.
And there's everything to gain from it. I mean, that's it sounds like something that could be useful outside of mental health issues, just useful on a human level. Just,
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
can. I mean, we do have, like I mentioned earlier, when we had to rethink through COVID restrictions, we tried to set up like a phone-based, well, WhatsApp-based, but talking aspect, and we created like a training for that. So you could, and we know we have people calling in from South Africa or from the region. I mean, we even had clients from China calling in, which I think those are Zimbabweans in the diaspora. Like we're happy to talk to someone. And you, I mean, if you look at our website, all the information is on our website, friendshipbenchzimbabwe.org, and people can literally contact there and say, I want a session. It's totally feasible. Yeah. Wow. And anybody can reach out there.
So what are the biggest barriers for you because you mentioned that your role is focusing on international projects? Where are some of the countries where it's working? And why would they need a friendship bench? And what are some of the barriers that you have to deal with, apart from funding? Yeah.
So we have replicated the friendship bench in a couple of countries by now. So it is happening in Malawi, it is happening on Zanzibar, it's happening in Kenya. We have, I've just recently completed a training in Jordan. It's actually quite interesting. So that whole idea of, okay, we have someone there with whom we work, it's a similar setting. So Malawi and Zanzibar are definitely the primary healthcare setting as well. And I think we're doing our first little steps away. So the Jordan replication is not primary healthcare. It is it's an organization that does mostly health advocacy, and they decided they also want to do something practical, and it's going to be fully online, and it's more aimed at younger people. And they work with volunteers, for instance. And in their society, volunteerism is something completely normal and acceptable. And therefore, there's less of this. People will disappear immediately again when there's something better to do. So I'm very hopeful for that. We've just started that basically. And like I said, we're in contact with a few people in South Africa. And I think at the moment, it's just a question of getting our act together, finding the funding for it, and agreeing on terms and conditions and doing the training. And here we go. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, Ruth, what do you know now that you wish you had known 5 years ago?
Oh, gosh, good question. Okay, one thing. Yeah, no, one thing definitely. It is easier to work with people, to train people who want to be in the training. I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? But if you work in the bigger context of healthcare or even like national healthcare, people might get told you will go to this training, right? So you will have a percentage of people who are like, oh God, I'm not interested in this, So ideally, if I could pick out those people who have a passion for mental health, which I think there are many, and work with them, I think the percentage of those who come out of a training and really apply the new skill will be much higher. Then what we also learned over time, which maybe would have been nice if we had learned earlier, is to do that integration, how do you integrate any kind of healthcare work with the mental health care components? So I know in our region, I would say pretty much all the governments, all the Ministry of Health have that mandate to join HIV care and mental health care, because we know how they need to go together. But often the skills are missing, and therefore that mental health care still sort of falls off the table a little bit. Currently, we're working with a big organization here in Zim to create that link of how to bring the mental health care into the HIV care, so that more people living with HIV and getting tested and getting their results are getting immediate mental health support. Because we do know as we know now, like you get tested, you get found you're living with HIV, you immediately put on the medication. And we know if you're not doing this medication taking right in the first year, your risk of falling off the medication adherence is huge. So if we need to catch people in the first year to make it solid for them that they are taking medication, they're living with this does not mean anything in terms of their life length or anything. So mental health care is super important on that level. And so get this integration well. So have basically everybody know about mental health aspects and where to turn to, where to refer to, get healthcare providers out of their own misbeliefs and misunderstandings and stigma. And I could go on and on and on. So I think if I had known these things earlier, maybe I would have started on a different level there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting you speak about the healthcare workers, because often I'm a professional nurse, and I found when I was working clinically, these are the very people who don't really want to look at themselves and don't even practice self-care. They're often very unhealthy. And I think that's an interesting point, that how do you start to shift and get them to buy in to the whole mental health approach? Yeah. What's the big dream? If you just had limitless money, what's your big dream for Friendship Bench?
Wow, limitless money, yay. So it's really funny. I spoke to someone about this the other day, and I said, I would want to put something like the Friendship Bench training or whatever it is called into school curricula, so that basically primary school kids already learn about emotional regulation and about emotional language and about acceptance and understanding. And so basically join a little bit that mental health first aid. So there's recognition of things and being able to approach someone, but definitely at the same time giving people skills as well, like the problem solving skill, which can be really helpful. I mean, it is definitely helpful. We've got evidence for that. Is it the only one? No, definitely not. But it's a good start, to give people something in their hand where they can say, okay, I'm feeling totally overwhelmed, but let me pull this apart. Let me put my friend next to me or my mother or whoever, and let me go step by step and come up with one thing,
So more preventive approach. and
Yeah.
just rather preventing it. It's interesting. I was in a coaching circle this morning, and two of the participants are from Zim, and they're both male. And they were talking
Mhm.
about how just the socialization of being a man, and how that they were taught from very young. They're not allowed to cry. They must be strong for the women and for the children. So it's trying to get past all of that to allow people to regulate.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I would think also just teaching people how to listen from an early age would be such an advantage. I mean, a lot of people see listening as just not interrupting, but there's so much richer in terms of just being able to ask the right questions and reflect and summarize and those things, which can really make just having basic conversations so much more profitable, which I think would be useful. Ruth, do people fail the training? I mean, if you go through the training and they just not getting it, do you strike them off the roll?
So we we try first to do some more training and see where it's stuck, I mean, I think, like I said earlier on, I would love to work with people who just say, I want to be in this training, I'm just passionate, because the likelihood of them not getting it is much lower um, than those who might actually feel quite like stigmatizing themselves, or just impatient with someone who just doesn't get it. And I think what I see in trainings is that there's a moment when people grasp the technique, because after all, it is a technique. I mean, problem solving has been around for that's like a classical CBT from a long time ago, last century stuff, and heavily researched and stuff. So people sort of grasp the technique, but then they forget that they're humans. So then they do the technique, but there is like hardly any connection. There's none of this empathy, or just kind of that creating closeness and talking to each other, and maybe even laughing or whatever. So that gets dropped. And then we have to come in and say again, wait a minute, bring the human back in. And then they get a bit confused with the technique, and then they're very human and might even fall back into advice giving, because that was attached to being this, I'm listening to you and your life is hard, you should be doing this and this. And then through practice, and I always believe there's a lot of practice needed and a lot of supervision needed and honesty, and which is complicated as well, right? Like when we learn a new skill, we feel very vulnerable, and all of us know that if we don't practice immediately, we might never do it right. So a lot of practice joining this. I have a technique, and I'm the human person in this. And I'm exactly what you just described. I'm the human who's interested, who's non-judgmental, who wants to hear what you go through and how you see this, and is able to take themselves a little bit back at that moment, right? Because that's the other side of coaching. It's not about them, but it's about the client. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned a lot of the research that you're busy with, and hopefully you'll be doing some publications soon. How do you keep your data? How do you collect your data, given a lot of these things seem to be quite informal? What's the way in which you collect your data?
Okay, so we also learned a lot about that, for instance, how to do this properly. So we have developed very basic registers, basically, where we say we are interested in the age group, the gender of people, and in this context, we're quite conservative. So we're working with two kind of genders here, male and female, and we're just not there yet to widen that out. And we look at the score on this questionnaire that I mentioned earlier. And so what do people come with? How do they start out with? And we're not turning anyone away. So even if someone scores very, very low on this questionnaire, it doesn't mean they don't stay for a session if they want to, And we look at how many sessions do people have, and do they go to the group? And so at the moment we work, or we do a lot of training of the delivering agents so that they understand why and how to collect this data. And that's something we've only started really working hard on the past 2 years. Before that, it was more of like I said before, it was more of a city health project. So we kind of probably a little bit naively relied on it's all happening. And then when we came back and wanted to look a little bit further, we were like, oh, it's actually not happening so much. So we don't have the data we thought we could have had. But there's no one to blame because it is complex, and we can't expect community health workers to be super seasoned data collectors. We are experimenting with an application to collect data. So that's also not as easy. And again, it's people don't have as easily access to the internet here. So all these fantastic apps that we can download are then not working, or it costs a lot of money to supply people either with a device and then also with a data bundle. So often it's still paper and pencil and a lot of handwork of putting data in.
What's the story that sticks out for you of all the stories that you've heard, or potential good that the service has provided?
Yeah, there are several, but there's one where so she came, she also felt suicidal and felt overwhelmed, and came through, I can't remember how many sessions she had, but she was in one of the suburbs here of Harare in the clinic, and later on we were told that she had basically gone on to become an advocate for Friendship Bench, telling everybody about Friendship Bench, like without anybody telling her. And I think even to the extent, which is also a dream of ours, to an extent of, hey, I learned how to do this, I can do this with others. So she was then reported to also being like talking to people, which is like fantastic. That's exactly what we want. And she started up like her own little support group. And that income generation group, and I think those are amazing stories. There's someone who takes an initiative. There's someone who takes a responsibility for almost like for the community, or the part of the community that she's operating in, and that is just cool. That would be amazing, right?
So Ruth, just probably like in winding up, I'm interested in the logistics that you have over there. I mean, like how many trainers, what's the shape of the organization, of the head office?
Yeah, the head office, great. Yeah, so at the head office, we are, and this is still partially because we're still doing research projects as well. So we have quite a bit of staff who are also research assistants, but who also do things. If you call the phone to speak to someone, you might end up talking to one of the research assistants who are trained in or to one of the students who are in attachment. So we have about 40 people working at Friendship Bench head office at the moment. The trainers, we've got 8, 10, something between that. We have in Zimbabwe, as we also worked with a few other organizations, we would, at the moment, the rough number is that we've trained around about 1,000 people to be Friendship Bench counselors. Not everybody is seeing a lot of clients, so there's also we're still working on setting that all up and supporting them. This is a bit funny because there's different kind of almost sub projects of the big project, but when we put them all together, they're about 1,000. So I think in the last month alone, I think we saw 10,000 roughly.
Wow.
I might, but let me not mix this up. No, 10, and this was in the whole year for the past 5 months. Basically, we saw 10,000.
That's still very impressive.
Yeah, it's exciting, and it just shows the need for people to have someone to talk to.
Exactly, and I guess sometimes you're not even going to hear the amazing stories that would have happened. I mean, things that would have happened had you not been there to intervene. So I think just to wrap up, to say what an amazing story and wonderful work that you're doing, Ruth, and for the team. It was so interesting to hear how you've gone about it and the challenges that you've had to go through. It's not easy. It's not simple, the stuff that you're doing. So hopefully we'll be able to support you in some way in the future. And it's really just all the best for this concept. It's just brilliant. It's been lovely to connect. Hilton?
Yeah, thanks so much, Ruth. I think it's been inspiring to hear the kind of work that you do. I mean, there's just so much to learn from you. So I hope our paths cross again. I've got some ideas to talk to you about, so I'm sure they will.
Good, fantastic. And you already help us so much by doing what you're doing, and inviting someone like me to your podcast is just amazing. And I'm sure we're going to be in South Africa soon.
Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. We really hope you enjoyed the episode. It would help us a lot if you subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. Give us 5 stars if possible, and check out our website www.omnicore.co.za. You'll find our previous episodes and other blogs and helpful resources, and we look forward to connecting in the next episode.